Hello everyone and welcome to my Braum guide. I have been very excited to make this video for you. Braum holds a special place in my heart. So just a little bit about me and why you should listen to me talking about Braum. I am a previous professional support player. I have reached Challenger 8 years in a row playing support, and I am a current full-time support coach. So given my experience with the game, I have connections with a lot of champions, but especially with Braum. He is my most played in my professional career, and I have won more than twice the games that I've lost on this champion, so I absolutely love the champion. Can't wait to get into it with you guys. I've played him a lot in many different seasons in solo queue as well, so not just competitive. So with all of that said, this is going to be a bit of a longer video. I really wanted to jump in depth for this one. So feel free to navigate via the timestamps down below, and without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's start with Braum's identity, and we're going to start by talking about his class. So he is a Warden. This is a defensive melee support that has less threat than other melee supports who are typically engagers. Wardens excel at peeling, keeping your carries alive, and typically function the best as counter picks. Braum is also one of the strongest level 1 supports in the game, getting to spread his passive, getting those stuns across the whole enemy team, so don't be afraid to call for your team to invade and group up and look to do something level 1. He is also the front to back king of melee supports, and when I say front to back, I mean, when a fight is organized in a front-to-back situation, you have your front line at the front, you have your carries and your back line at the back, and it's neatly organized. Then Braum can really excel to spread his stuns and to keep his carries alive, because he has such excellent peel and he is tanky himself. He can also do a lot of work in chokes. With his ult, placing that in a choke, it can cover the entire choke and be really tricky for the enemy to play around. Also his E blocking projectiles in a narrow area. He counters short range the most, and conversely he sucks against long range and mobility, and so he is a counter pick. He should be treated mainly as a counter pick champion. If you try to brute force and hard engage through Braum, you're going to have a really tough time, but if you can poke and play on the fringes of the fight and be annoying and have longer range, then Braum can feel pretty useless pretty quickly. He also counters important projectiles. Because his E blocks projectiles, so he can function very well against champions who have important projectiles, like Ornn's ult, like Nami's ult, like Renata's ult, like Israel's ult. These would all fizzle out as soon as they touch Braum's E. He is also easily bullied in lane versus range supports because he just lacks that threat to be able to punish them and kill them like other higher threat melee supports would have. Moving on to Braum's matchups. In the bot lane, he is good against engagers by being reactive and disengaging, and then winning extended trades with his auto attacks, his passive being procced, and his short Q cooldown. Most engagers you'd be happy to verse as Braum, but especially Nautilus, as you can body block his Q and you can prevent follow-up with his slow ultimate quite easily. So you will see Braum counterpicked against Nautilus in pro play a lot. Some engagers are tough to deal with. Rakan would be the toughest for Braum. Rakan is kind of like an engager playmaker hybrid anyway. He is too slippery and it's tough to punish or stop Rakan from doing what he wants to do. Rel as well, she's just very strong at the moment, and her big AoE is too much to deal with unless you consistently cancel her engage with your ultimate, which is very tough to do. Practically all mages and enchanter supports have a free lane versus Braum. Braum is just a very hard champion to blind pick. He's going to be outranged. He's not going to have enough threat to punish and prevent him from just slowly getting whittled down from range. In terms of ADCs that Braum likes to pair with, he is great with Israel, as they have a lot of threat level 1. You can pincer the lane from either side and just throw out skill shots. Otherwise, Lucian pairs well with him as well by quickly proccing his passive. Otherwise, the most synergy you will find with Braum is with immobile, auto-attacking ADCs that appreciate his peel. Champions that come to mind for this are champions like Kog'Maw. You will see G2 blind picking Kog'Maw and Braum a lot recently as of this video. Twitch, Jinx, Draven, Ashe, on-hit Varus, they will all appreciate his peel and can proc his passive pretty well. Braum really does not enjoy playing with mages as his ADC. Otherwise, most ADCs can work decently with him. Moving on to Braum's runes, and Guardian is practically the only keystone that feels good on Braum, and Resolve Tree is just great for Braum in general. So let's first explore what this rune page will look like. We're going to go Guardian. This is going to help keep your carries alive. You're going to stay near your carries and you're going to press your W and you can easily proc the Guardian. And then for the most part, we're going to go Font of Life and then either Bone Plating or Second Wind. Bone Plating is going to help keep you alive in more volatile bot matchups, and second wind is going to keep you healthier when you're going to get poked out. Braum is also tanky enough to be able to use second wind throughout the game. So sometimes when you're playing support, second wind can help in laning phase, and then you're just too squishy for it to do anything for the rest of the game. But Braum has that survivability, so you can really consider second wind maybe a little bit more often than bone plating. I wouldn't recommend considering conditioning, because then you're just going to be far too squishy and abusable in the laning phase, even though it would scale well with his W and building resistances. The thing is, when you are picking Braum, it's probably going to be verse engagers, and you would want to have that additional safety that bone plating provides. So maybe it's going to be a little bit more 50-50, as long as you understand what each rune provides here. And then for the last tree, we're going to go unflinching if it's valuable. If it's not valuable, if you're not verse a lot of CC from the enemy team, then we consider both of the others. Now, Overgrowth is a rune that I have never recommended on any support in the game, but on Braum, because he scales so well with health to increase his Q's damage and to give him that tankiness for his resistances from W and his damage reduction from E to have a huge effect for his tankiness, this is worth considering. So I would say if they don't have much CC, then this can be a bit of personal preference. Revitalize, that's going to scale Guardian's Shield, it's going to scale Font of Life's healing, it's going to scale Locket and Redemption and the healing from Knight's Vow. So you're always going to get value from this, but I can see an argument to be made to make yourself as tanky as possible with Overgrowth. So like most supports that don't go for Resolve secondary, he's going to have a little bit of secondary rune-itis. This is what I call when you just don't have the greatest runes in the secondary tree to feel really good. And so what we're going to do for the vast majority of our games is we're going to go Inspiration. And honestly, there are a lot of options in this tree that we can make an argument for. What I would go for the most part is Cosmic and Biscuit. Biscuit is a rune that I like to take when you have mana issues. And Braum really struggles to poke out their enemies with his Q. It costs quite a lot of mana. It doesn't do that much damage. So this is going to feel quite nice to have a little bit more uptime with your spells, get some more rotations in. And to be honest, the alternatives aren't really that great. I don't like DMAT. This doesn't scale at all. And Futures Market was nerfed recently. And also on Braum, you don't really want to go Lucidities or Swifties as much, so you want to build those tankier boots, and then you can build the components for that quite comfortably, so you don't really get that much value out of Futures Market anyway. And Cosmic, this is just always going to give you value, right? You're always going to appreciate having shorter summon a spell cooldowns, especially if you're looking to trade your flash with the enemy. And Item Haste, that's going to apply to your Trinket, to your Sweeper, to your Locket, to potentially Redemption. Now, I do want to talk about Approach Velocity and Biscuits. And so we would go this rune if we are going to be versing ranged champions and we really want to have a little bit more threat, because if you don't have threat versus these ranged matchups, we can just bleed out really easily. Of course, I'm going to talk about in-depth with his laning phase a little bit later on, but these are going to be the main two decisions between Biscuit and Cosmic and Biscuit and Approach Velocity. If you're not sure, I would recommend just defaulting to Biscuits and Cosmic Inside. You're always going to get some type of value out of the secondary rune setup. I wouldn't recommend magical footwear too much. This prevents you from buying boots, and then you're going to be stuck in lane. You're not going to have any mobility or agency to roam towards mid or to roam up and potentially contest Herald for your team. However, if your games are really slow and your laning phase is really extended and you just want to greed, you can consider this rune. Wouldn't recommend Hex Flash and Stopwatch. This is just another skill in and of itself that can make it a little bit harder to perform on your champion. You have to learn how to use this well, and Braum has a lot of survivability regardless, so I'm not too convinced on this one. So you can have a play around with these runes yourself, but I would recommend sticking to Cosmic and Biscuit or Approach and Biscuit. Now for other potential secondary runes, we can consider going Precision, and we would do this to go Triumph and Legend Tenacity. So if we verse a lot of CC, then we can consider this. Unfortunately, they did nerf how Unflinching and Legend Tenacity interacts, and so it's going to give less value than previously, as of the making of this video, of course. But this can be a really solid rune for Braum in scrappy, chaotic games. You can get a lot of value out of Triumph. The only issue is these runes are quite conditional to get value out of, right? You need to get a kill or assist to get anything from this. And you need to stack this up with kills, with assists, with a lot of last hits with your Relic Shield or Shoulder Guards to get value out of this as well. However, the longer that your games typically go, then the stronger an argument you could make for these two runes. I wouldn't really recommend experimenting with the domination tree too much in terms of like Zombie and Relentless Hunter or Zombie Ward and Ulti Hunter. It's not really part of your champion's identity. You're not going to have that much agency by yourself. Your identity is not centered around having your ult up as much as possible or roaming around as much as possible. And so this champion has pretty set runes in my opinion. Now, if you're really determined to be a hipster and just to go something other than Guardian because, I don't know, you don't like the rune, you can potentially consider Unsealed Spellbook. and then we would back it up with Resolve Secondary, with a combination of Second Wind and Bone Plating and one of these down here. The reason that spellbook isn't going to be that great is because apart from Ignite and Exhaust and maybe Heal, the other summoner spells are just not going to be very useful for Braum at all. And you're probably going to miss having that little extra tankiness that Guardian is going to give you to stay alive, to keep your carries alive. The last one I'm going to give any type of lip service to, if you want to be an absolute psycho, you can consider a Hail of Blades, and you can go for some type of lane domination setup, something like that. And the reason that this wouldn't be good is because it would just scale absolutely horribly, and you're going to miss out on the tankiness and the utility that Guardian and Inspiration Tree can provide. However, maybe you're expecting to butt heads really heavily in the 2v2, and then this can give you that surprise early damage and skirmishing. I just wouldn't recommend experimenting too much with Braum on the runes. In terms of rune shards, so when you are picking Braum, you are normally picking adverse short-range champions, and attack speed is going to help to get a lot of auto attacks out and to proc your passive reliably. So most of the time, this is the type of rune setup that you want. You will want that armor, of course, and then the scaling health, this is going to come online quite quickly for your champion. And like I mentioned before, health scales fantastically on Braum, and you can afford to just scale up a little bit so that you can be a little bit tankier. However, if it's a really, really volatile early lane, you can consider a double armor just to have that survivability early on. Otherwise, if we are versus ranged champions, then this is more so the type of rune setup that we would be looking at, because we would struggle to use our attack speed versus double ranged matchups. So overall, if we are versus melee supports, this is generally what our rune page is going to look like. And then if we are versus ranged supports, this is generally what our rune page and our setup is going to look like. Now, I know this isn't for runes, but I did want to quickly talk about summoners. So we want to go Ignite and Flash 10 times out of 10. Exhaust and Heal are quite weak, and you have enough peel, so you don't really need the Exhaust. Having that Ignite to turn around and have some kill threat is going to go a long way for Braum. Also, there's just going to be so much fighting and action going on in solo queue. Don't get baited by seeing pros go Exhaust or Heal on Braum. Pro games and solo queue and your games are just going to be completely different games. It's going to be very slow, very controlled, and so I would recommend just sticking to Ignite. Moving on to Braum's items, we're going to start off with his support item. We're going to go Shoulder Guard here, as his Q does not scale with AP. So don't autopilot and go Relic Shield. Let's start Shoulder Guards, and then you're going to have a little bit more damage to minions and to champions in early skirmishes. Then for the most part, we are going to want to build towards our tier 2 boots, Mercury Treads and Ninja Tabis, depending on which of these gives you more value in the game. Have a think if they have a lot of AD and a lot of auto attackers, Ninja Tabis. If they have a bunch of CC, Merc Treads. If neither of them look that good, then you can consider Swifties instead. Now, you don't have to rush tier 2 boots first every single time. You can stop after getting your tier 1 brown boots, and you can get Ruby Crystal. Health, great stat on Braum, and can make him tanky enough to survive some engagers in the bot lane. Apart from getting your Ruby Crystal, I wouldn't recommend delaying your tier 2 boots by much more. And so then we're going to be building towards our mythic item, which is going to be Locket. 9 out of 10 times, maybe 95 out of 100 times. If you are snowballing and the enemy team doesn't have that much burst, then you can consider Radiant. It's a great item, it gives you that health, but it is quite expensive for Braum. Even Shroud, it doesn't really fit Braum's identity. You want to keep your allies alive, and you want to extend your skirmishes, be tanky, and get your passive spread out. So I know that Even Shroud has been building a little bit in popularity, but I really do recommend sticking to the Locket, keeping your carries alive. Okay, so then for our legendary items, we are going to consider Knight's Vow or Redemption / Mikhail's. Most of the time for our second item, Knight's Vow is a great stat stick. It just gives you a lot of really useful stats. Cooldown reduction, health, armor. Its active can be useful to keep a carry alive, especially if they have high DPS, if they're a bit of a hyper carry. But if you just want to use it as a stat stick, that is more than fine. Now let's talk about Redemption and Mikhail's. It might sound weird for me to recommend that, but they do both give health nowadays. And the heal and shield power that they give is going to scale your Font of Life, your Guardian, your Knight's Vow healing, your Locket shielding, etc. Redemption is always going to find use in solo queue if you just use it to be able to heal your team up in a skirmish. You plop it in the middle of a skirmish or a team fight is just going to give a lot of value. Mikhail's, of course, if you verse highly impactful single target CC champions, maybe there's an Ashe or a Zoe or a Lysandra, champions like that. If in doubt, I would just default to Knight's Vow or Redemption on your second item, and then for your third item, you can potentially build the other one. I think Redemption is just a really underrated item in general and on Braum. Afterwards, we can consider some other tanky items. Thornmail, if they have a lot of healing auto attackers. Frozen Heart, if they have just a lot of auto attackers, and that slow field from Frozen Heart is going to be useful. whichever looks the most valuable in the situation. So honestly, you can mix and match these items quite a lot as long as your second item is a health item and as long as you don't build both Redemption and Mikhail's, because then that's going to be a little bit too much utility. You're probably not going to be quite tanky enough. If you verse a lot of AP, I don't recommend building too much into magic resist items. I still don't think they're in the best spot for supports. You can build health instead. However, if they are really indexed into magic damage and you have some magic damage on your team yourself, you can consider Abyssal Mask potentially third item. And if you ever get to the sixth item, then you can build Vigilant Wardstone. As of this video, it is not in the best spot since its nerf. If you just want to cut and paste builds to plug into all of your games, I would recommend Locket and then Knight's Vow, then Redemption, and then probably Frozen Heart. But the thing about support is you're very rarely going to be building towards full items anyway. Most of your games is going to end when you have 2 or 3 items. Moving on to Braum's abilities and combos, first I want to give a brief description of his abilities. So his passive is Concussive Blows, his attacks and his Q is going to apply a stack onto enemies, and once they reach 4 stacks from your or from your allies' auto attacks, then they're going to get stunned. And this is your main form of threat in your kit. This cooldown interval is going to change when Braum is at level 1, level 6, and level 11. When he's level 1, it's going to be an 8-second cooldown per target. When he's level 6, it's going to be a 6-second cooldown. And when he's level 11, it's going to be a 4-second cooldown. And this was changed in 13.3 earlier this season as of the making of this video. So his level 6 all-in is going to be that much scarier because you can get that second stun off quicker. Your auto attacks are going to do a little bit more damage to those champions, but the main idea is that you're going to spread this around as much as possible to get as many stuns off onto the enemies. His Q is a skill shot that does damage and slows the first target hit, and it is blocked by minions. This is his main trading tool or poking tool in lane. And like previously mentioned, it does apply his passive Concussive Blows onto it, so then you can attack them and get that stun. His W, Stand Behind Me, he's going to leap to a target ally champion or ally minion, and he's going to give both him and his target, if it's a champion, armor and magic resist for 3 seconds. His E, Unbreakable, is probably his trademark ability. He places up a shield in a target direction, and in that direction he is going to block projectiles, first of all. He is also going to reduce the first instance of champion damage by 100%. So the description gets this wrong. It's not just the first missile that Braum blocks that does no damage, it's the first instance of champion damage at all that will deal no damage. And it's not subsequent projectiles that deal reduced damage. Again, it is all damage that is going to be reduced when he has his shield up. But throughout his E duration, he is going to block all projectiles. And he's not going to cause them to fizzle out, it's going to hit Braum. Braum also gains move speed the entire duration that his E is up. The last point for Braum's E is that it is only going to reduce damage in the direction of his shield. So if you place it forwards, and then you take damage from the back, it's going to be as if you don't have your E up at all. And last but not least, Braum's ultimate, Glacial Fissure. He slams the ground and sends a shockwave that travels forwards and knocks up enemy champions that are hit, and also creates a slow field that is going to last on the ground for 4 seconds, and it slows the enemies that are on this path. It deals magic damage to all enemies that it hits, and the first target is knocked up for a duration that depends on how far away they are from Braum. So if you're right on top of the first enemy champion that is hit, it's only going to do a short knockup, but if you're further away, then it's going to do a much longer knockup, and that's only going to apply to the first enemy champion hit. All other champions are going to get that minimal knockup duration. So just for a visual, if they are the first champion that is hit, longer knockup. If they are the second champion hit, shorter knockup. Moving on to his combos, and so the bread and butter combo that you want to be able to do is just Q Flash. So this is normal Q, and then this is Q Flash, which is going to be different than Flash and then Q, because it's just going to hide the animation. It's going to be much harder to react. Most of the time they're just going to hit it, or Panic Flash and just get hit by the Q anyway. And so this is pretty much all that you can do with Q alone. Moving on to Braum's W, and there are quite a few interesting mechanics for this ability. So we know that it jumps to your ally that you press it on, but if there is an enemy champion within 1500 units in sight, then your W is going to place yourself between your ally and the enemy. And so here, obviously, there are some enemies here. If I W onto this dummy, it's going to place me between my ally and the nearest enemy. So it's going to put me over here. If there are no enemies nearby, so this is my other ally, if there are no enemies nearby, then it's just going to put me on the other side of the ally, like so. So if you are Versa Braum and you see Braum uses W on an ally, and he ends between the ally and yourself, then you know that you are on a ward. like so. But if the Braum uses his W and it doesn't place him between his ally and yourself, even though you're still there, then you know that it's not warded. You can, of course, use your W to hop over walls as well. You can self-cast it if you don't have anything to jump to, just to give you those resistances on yourself. You can cast it on minions, and that's going to place you in the location of the minion when you press the ability. But if there's a nearby enemy, then you're going to end between the minion and the enemy. It's also worth noting that you can W to pets, like Annie's Tibbers, Ivan's Daisy, Malzahar's, Spawn's, Shaco Boxes, etc. The last point for just his W himself is if you cast your W at max range, then it's going to place you on top of your ally if there are no enemies in range. So if you're walking towards a champion or a minion and you press your W, then once you get in range, you're going to cast it and you're going to appear on top of your ally. However, if you are slightly within the maximal range, then you are going to end up on the other side of them. So to get the maximum distance out of your W, you don't want to use it, you don't want to walk up and use it at max range. You want to enter slightly over the max range, slightly over. And then you're going to jump and end up on the other side. So you can create a little bit more distance. This is going to be the most relevant when you're pathing out of base and maybe you have tier 2 boots, you're a little bit faster than your ADC and you're trying to link up with them, or you can use your E to get in range to jump to them. Don't buffer your W, wait until you are actually within the max range, and then you can cast it and get that extra distance. Moving on to Braum's E, so this is going to cancel some of his animations, which is something that you guys might not be aware of, but it's only going to cancel his animations if it's cast in the middle of his W. So let's compare and contrast Braum's W into Q versus Braum's W and then E mid dash and then Q. Here's WQ. Here's W and then E to cancel the animation of his Q. A lot faster, a lot harder to react to. This will not work if you press E before your W. Only during your W. The same exact thing is going to apply to your R. So here's just W and then R. Here's W with E in the animation and then R. A lot faster. So given that his E blocks the first instance of champion damage, not just projectiles, you can use this to block damage from global abilities, as long as you aim it in the appropriate direction. So let's say you're really low and there's a Karthus under bot tower that is ulting you, then if you press your E in the direction of Karthus, then you will block the damage. If you cast it in the direction away from Karthus, then it wouldn't block the damage. And just a reminder that the E intercepts projectiles, it doesn't cancel them out. So if you verse, let's say Nami, and she presses Q, that bubble is going to hit you, and then it's going to create that knock-up zone right there. So sometimes you're just going to get yourself and your ally knocked up. Same with Jinx's ult, you're going to cause it to splash around you. This is self-evident when you are versing Ornn. You want to use your E to block the first instance of his ult, because the first instance does that slow. And then when he hits his ram, then that second instance is going to knock up. So you block the slow. If you tried to just block the second part, you're going to get knocked up, which you obviously wouldn't want. You can also use your E against ranged minions so that you can reduce a little bit of damage from them, and this can help you to do some wave management, to hold freezes, and to stay a little bit healthier while you're tanking the wave. How we're typically going to be using our E in the laning phase is to block the enemy ADC's auto attacks when your ADC is caught out. So it's mainly going to be used as a reactive tool, unless you're going to use that animation cancel part of it to jump forwards and catch the enemy off guard with an all-in. The other way you can use your E is to be annoying and block the enemy ADC's last hits on a cannon minion. And the last point about his E is that you want to have a blueprint for your E loading into the game, a plan of when it is going to be the most impactful in that given game. A lot of the times there aren't going to be any important projectiles for your E to block, and that's fine, but if there are, then you are going to want to be a little bit more reactive with your E to make sure that those projectiles don't come out. However, it's not necessary for Braum to get value from the projectile blocking component of his E. It's going to make him tankier, it's going to make him move faster, and there's always going to be an ADC in the game as well to block auto attacks. Moving on to Braum's ultimate, and this is going to cancel his Q and his W animation as well. So you can ult and then cast a very fast Q like that, or you can ult and then jump very quickly as well. The way that we're going to conceptualize Braum's ultimate is to use it to interrupt dashes and particular engage tools like Jarvan's EQ, like Rakan's dash forwards, like Alistar's combo forwards, etc. However, again, it is not necessary to use this dash cancelling component of it. You can use it in chokes to get a lot of control around an area, and it's just going to give melee champions who are just trying to get in on top of your team or to try to get away that knock-up and that slow field is going to be really annoying. To get the fastest, most surprising Q onto your enemy, we are going to combine the animation cancelling E with his flash. And so that's going to be W and then E mid-air and then Q flash. As opposed to just a W Q flash, you're locked out for quite a while. For the most reliable hard engage, that's going to be your W into E mid-air for the animation cancel on your ultimate, like so. This is one of the most common mistakes that I see on Braum and that I did for the longest time, but what you want to do if you are trying to be defensive and block projectiles for your allies, make sure that you're pressing E before you press your W. There's no point in Wing to your ally and then Eing in the direction, because that's a lot of time that you don't have your E blocking projectiles. You want to E in the direction that you will end up, and then you want to W, so that you block the projectiles as soon as possible. But make sure you're deliberate in where you are pressing your E. You don't want to just press E towards the enemy where you currently are and then W to your ally, because then, that's not going to be the optimal placement for your E to block projectiles. Then the last combo I'm going to mention, this is just going to be the fastest way for you to use all of your spells. W, then E, then R, then Q. So we're going to W, and then we're going to E mid-air, so that it gives us that animation cancel on the R, and then that R is also going to give us the animation cancel on the Q. So let's just get a visual for that. Moving on to Braum's ability order, and now Braum is one of the most flexible champs for levels in the entire game, in my opinion. You can Q max, you can go 3 points Q into E max, you can go 3 points Q into W max, you can go straight E max. Each level of his Q is going to reduce the cooldown and make it deal more damage, which is significant. Each point of his W is going to give bonus armor and magic resist to himself and to his allies and to reduce the cooldown. It was also recently buffed earlier in Season 13, which is significant. And then his E is going to get a lot of cooldown reduction and extra damage reduction with each level, which is significant. The thing about Braum's E is that the cooldown gets applied after his E expires. And so this is a 3.81 second cooldown with all of this ability haste. It only applies at the end. However, if you do stack a lot of ability haste, more than half of the time your E is going to be up and give you that excellent damage reduction at the 5th level. So this is why E max is viable, and a lot of people do enjoy getting 5 points into E as quickly as possible. I quite enjoy putting a lot of points into W pretty quickly, because it just gives yourself and your allies so much tankiness, especially in solo queue when there are so many assassins and fights breaking out all over the place. These resistances can make a huge impact, whereas your E is mainly selfish to give yourself tankiness if there are no important projectiles to block. And then Q, if you don't put many points into Q, your laning phase is going to be a little bit weaker. So I wouldn't recommend only having 1 point in Q for the entire game, pretty much. So this is a really hard champion for me to say, just do this every single time. You can really play around with these, and I think a lot of it is going to be personal preference and situation dependent. However, I think for the most part, you would want to go 3 points Q to have that laning power into either W or E max. W max if there's a lot of short range and fighting and a fast game pace. E max if there are some longer range champions with important projectiles that you can block, or if you are the solo frontliner and you need those resistances and uptime. Moving on to Braum's laning phase, so I wanted to make a section for this by itself just to talk about it on paper before we see examples, for a couple reasons. First of all, Braum's laning phase is not as black and white as other champs or other support classes. And secondly, I don't think approaching this guide concept by concept like I have been doing with my guides lately is the best approach for this champion. It's just going to be a little bit all over the place. So the first point is Braum does have a very strong level 1. He is one of the strongest level 1 supports in the game. Consider stacking or invading. I'm not going to go over in depth exactly how you would want to do that. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt on finding a creative angle to invade. Otherwise, I want to talk about what makes Braum's laning phase so tricky. His wave management and his ability usage is going to be a bit awkward due to his lack of threat. Wardens, they lack threat as opposed to engagers, and so you are punishable and you don't quite have that threat to kill. So when you are versus melee supports, you want to generally be reactive and patient with your ability usage, and you want to be more comfortable with freezing. This is just a rule of thumb. The onus of proactivity is on the enemies, and you are going to heavily outscale if they never find any openings onto yourself, so that's part of why you want to be reactive. But otherwise, if you are proactive with your spells, then that's going to give the enemy an opening to actually engage, and then you won't have your cooldowns, you won't be able to keep your lane alive. And Braum's reactive counter engage trade is one of the best in bot lane as well. You're going to have Guardian, you're going to have your W resistances, you're going to have Font of Life, you're going to have your E. This is going to make you hard win the trade after they engage onto you or your ADC. You can go fishing with your Q because it will be easier to hit melee supports with your Q. However, with your W, with your E, with your Guardian, make sure that you're keeping those available for the counter engage. And this is a mentality. You want to be okay with a reactive pace of game, understanding that a slow pace of game is going to be good for you versus these matchups. Now, on the other hand, we're going to do almost a complete 180, and we want to be proactive versus ranged matchups. Ranged supports are going to be tough for your champion to deal with. You need to find a creative solution or you'll just slowly bleed out. Due to our inherent lack of threat, it's not going to be as easy as holding a freeze and then all-inning them when the wave is on our side of the lane. So what we can do is either try to posture to permanently shove and find as many free auto attacks on the wave as they allow you to, and just try to overwhelm the enemy's lane with minions so that they don't have any time or any space to poke us out meaningfully. And then hopefully they allow us to do that long enough so that we get past the tricky laning phase and we're able to skirmish and teamfight later on. If that's not looking likely or possible, then we can stay healthy instead, allow yourself to get shoved in, embrace reality. We understand that this is a likely outcome on paper. So we're going to lose gracefully and then pick our moment to W onto a minion into the Q, or W onto a minion into the Q flash. We will get plenty of visuals of this in the laning phase examples. Now, the last point I want to talk about in terms of wave management is we can pay particular attention to our jungler. So if our jungler is pathing towards us, we can look to freeze, because while we may not have sufficient 2v2 threat, if our jungler is around, then we're going to have enough threat to warrant that freeze. Let's just try to keep in mind that these are generalizations, right? These are rules of thumb. At the end of the day, if you have threat, hold a freeze. If you don't have threat, look to shove or minimize gracefully. You'll have to make an assessment in the situation. The other way that we can use our jungler is to use his proximity to bail us out and get a crash into base. We want to be really comfortable with this type of blueprint because there are going to be so many tough matchups for Braum. So be prepared to stay healthy, minimize, get shoved in, and then eventually your jungler is going to be on your side of the map. Make sure you're in a position to actually use his presence to achieve something. If you've just been bleeding out and you're getting poked out horribly, then you're too low for him to do anything. That's going to be a disaster. So in that situation, he can get a gank and free us up out of the lane, or he can even shove the wave with us to get that crash into base. Embracing reality is going to be a very important skill on Braum because he does lack some tools to make plays himself. And now the last point that I want to talk about in terms of the laning phase, we want to facilitate Herald post 8 minutes. So Braum is solid at roaming and skirmishing. You don't want to be locked in lane forever. Herald is also very broken at the moment, no matter what champion you're playing. So post 8 minutes, we want to start prioritizing tempo and shoving rather than freezing. So look for a window to shove bot and then shift up the map and then shove mid and then facilitate Herald when our jungler is active on top river. No point in doing that if our jungler is bot side or if he's basing or if he's still on his top camps and he's not on top river. I believe it is the support's responsibility to find a window to facilitate Herald for your team, but especially if you're versus ranged champions, there's a bigger argument to be made to really push for that window to link up with your team and get Herald. Let's move on to Braum's laning phase examples, and the first example I want to show is just a quick visual of Braum's level 1 strength. And so what's going to happen here is there is going to be some activity. They are trying to invade, and then I'm going to collapse on that. And we can just see how much threat we do have level 1. It's going to be a bit of an extended fight here, but our Q cooldown is relatively short, and whenever I do manage to find a Q, there's going to be so much threat with that slow into the stun. And then my next Q is going to come up, and we force another flash. Otherwise, let's just speed it up a little bit and wait until we get back into lane. And so for this matchup, Ezreal Braum, that's one of those combinations in the bot lane that I was talking about, where Ezreal can pincer on one side of the lane and Braum on the other, and then we have those threatening skill shots, quite scary from level 1. But also with Versa Pike, a very high threat melee support, and we are going to want to be a little bit more reactive with our ability usage here. I'll be very comfortable with the slow, controlled pace of lane, and so Pike uses his hook, and so that affords me the opportunity to counter engage. And then I'm going to land my Q. I'm going to get some orders. My orders do more damage once the passive has procced. So that's just worth noting. So we get a huge chunk on the back end there. And then I'm going to spread my passive onto the Nyla as well. Relatively short Q cooldown, get another Q off. And that's just a pace of trades that I really want to embrace on as Braum. Okay, so we're going to hit level 2 first as well. And then I'm still going to be mainly reactive. This pike is trying to be proactive, not finding the greatest windows and allowing me to just get these really concise reactive trades off. And it's going to work out really well for us in the 2v2. Now, in terms of wave management, honestly, you can make an argument for either case. You can argue to try and keep shoving and poking and pressuring, and you can make an argument to try and freeze. As long as you just commit to one of those decisions, I'm happy. And I think the most important thing is for you to be reactive in these types of matchups with your Q and with the rest of your spells when you get them. The lower and lower that everyone in the lane gets, the more inclined you are to shove, so that you can afford your ADC a window to base, and so that you don't allow the enemy ADC to base for free and come back to lane. But also our jungle, we can see that they are pathing down the map, and so if we did hold a freeze, there is quite a high likelihood of having some threat. But I'm going to just decide to keep up the pressure and shove instead, and just be reactive with my spells. It's going to speed this up a little bit. I'm not jumping forwards. I'm not looking to go fishing for my Q. And the pike is pressured to go fishing for his Q. And then that's going to give me a little bit of a window to walk forwards, find another Q. This is, again, reactive, punishing his Q cooldown. And it's just going to be a really controlled pace of lane like that. I forgot to mention, but the last argument that we can have to just hold the freeze is so that we're not extended up in the lane, which gives them the opportunity to potentially gank us. But like I said, I'm happy just applying the pressure here, keeping our foot on the gas. And it's just going to be so exceptionally hard for them to make any inroads if I am maintaining my Guardian up, if I am going to keep my W, keep my E, and I have my bone plating, then they're just never really going to win that initial trade, and my Q and my passive just going to do so much work on the back end, and then we're just going to outscale really easily. Okay, moving on to this game, and so we are Twitch Braum versus Jinx and Janna. This is a complete 180 to how we are going to approach the lane. This game in particular has a bit of a wonky level 1. Their Janna is roaming for a late invade, and so we're not going to be too pressured early on, but you will see that I'm going to look to be more proactive as the lane goes on. I can't afford to just be reactive with my spells. This double range matchup. So let me just speed past this and wait until Janna does come back to lane. I'm just landing some Qs on the Jinx as she's trying to catch some XP in the wave. Looking to pressure from Fog. And then eventually this wave is going to crash. And then, since my jungler is on my side of the map, then we have some options of threat, right? Like, we could maybe look for a dive if my jungler was here faster. We could have dove. Or I can just let this following wave push back into us, and then we could look for a gank. If my jungler was topside, then I would be much more inclined to just keep my foot on the gas, probably shove as much as possible, and try to collect as many minions without slowly getting poked by the double range lane in front of me. Like I said, you really want to pay attention to your jungler on this champion. And so eventually I'm going to peel off into Fog. I'm going to let this wave push back into us. This is going to be a brief roam window. We're not going to get too many of these, especially this early on. But maybe the Jace doesn't respect this roam and I can get something done here, and we're just letting this wave push back into us anyway. So I'm just being a Fog warrior, linking up with my jungle. And eventually I'm going to move back down. This whole time I ensured that I was in Fog. I did activate my sweeper. And then this wave, as I said, pushing back into us. Either they are going to respect the potential that we kill them here, and they're just going to bleed minions and lose to the freeze, or they're going to try and move up and crash a wave into our tower and then be exposed to this gank. So this is already more creative, more proactive, and then the Jinx is going to walk up for these minions. That's going to be the trigger for me to walk forwards. And now the difference between landing your Q and not is just absolutely huge. You need to be patient. You need to really line up your Q. You don't want to just, get overexcited and throw out your Q, really panicked immediately. Just take your time, make sure you throw it at the right time, and then we land the Q, and that's probably going to mean a kill most of the time. Okay, cool. So we get a kill, and now we're going to look to crash the wave into base so that my ADC can spend all of his gold. And I really want to make sure this wave crashes, so there's another wave coming up here. And so we're going to shove another wave. We can see my Twitch is kind of greeting for a plate, so I'm just going to help him to be able to do that safely. I'm going to place my E, so that the Jinx traps gets blocked by that, and then he gets out with the plate gold as well. So we're just going to speed this up now. We're going to go home, and we're going to come back to lane. And again, I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to be a little bit creative. I'm going to try to wrap around on this Jinx. I know that she just used her flash on that gank when I landed my Q. I still have my flash, and so maybe we have just enough threat with my flash to be able to kill the Jinx here. And so that's what I'm going to try. We can see how it works out. But here I'm just going to Q flash so that she can't react to it in time. This is always going to hit. And then, you know, if my Twitch dodges this tornado, or if we just have a little bit more damage, then it could work out. So obviously I overstepped my limits here, but we did get a huge amount of damage, and this is how you do want to approach these ranged lanes. You can't just sit back and let them outrange and outpoke you, and you slowly bleed. Okay. So, pushing from Fog again. Just going to speed this up a little bit. You can see how much pressure they are under. And then we're going to look to try and dive them on this stacked wave. And I'm trying to get some damage down on them beforehand. And again, you know, I'm using my jungler to achieve something here. If my jungler wasn't here, that's totally fine. I could look to roam, or I could look to let this push back into us, or I could look to keep my foot on the gas. But here we are. We're going to go for a dive. And it's just going to be a little bit awkward. Unfortunately, I get knocked up right on the edge of the tower range there. But a completely different energy, a completely different approach to this type of lane. So this is a window where I could definitely look to facilitate Herald. I could look to shove a bot wave, shift mid, shove a mid wave, and then meet my jungler on top river when he is active there. However, the way that this game is panning out, my mid is really far behind, my jungle is really far behind. Bot wave is pushing back into me, and my ADC is a bit fed. So I'm a little bit more inclined, just in this situation, to focus more around the 2v2. But in a different circumstance, I would be very happy to facilitate Herald for my team. Okay, and so let's see what happens. I'm going to move down bot. I'm going to try to use my Twitch as a win con here. And try to be proactive and creative. And so I'm going to try to pressure from Fog. I'm going to try to find a Q. If I find a Q, it's devastating. And also my Twitch is, you know, post level 6 now. And so he has that ult. We have a lot more kill threat. If I land one Q and he just presses ult, that's just going to be a flash or a kill. So I'm posturing. I'm being really patient with my Q. I'm not just immediately throwing it out and giving her that safe juke. And then I play a bit of that mind game, finally kind of download her juke patterns, land a Q, Twitch presses R, and then we get that kill. The difference between hitting and missing your Q is night and day. And just one more visual of that, and this game is getting more and more polarized, where bot is our only win con, mid really struggling, jungle really struggling, top struggling. And so I'm going to pressure from Fog, going to look for another creative opening. I let Twitch stealth, walk forwards, and this time, unfortunately, I missed the Q. So I'm just going to have to back off for this one, but we do have a relatively short Q cooldown, and so once Twitch presses R, I'm going to jump forwards onto him. Remember, you're going to end up between your ally and enemy when you press W, and then this is a really important Q. If I land, she dies. If I don't, then she doesn't. So we landed, and she dies. And there we go. For this game, we have the MF Braum versus the Kai'Sa Blitzcrank matchup, and this is a high threat lane. We're going to be more reactive with our spells, or at least we should be. I'm going to show you a window where I don't, and then I should get punished. Otherwise, I'm going to be hitting the first wave. I'm going to be trying to hit level 2 first. I'm trying to be more reactive. I'm walking forwards here, hitting the melees on the second wave, really pushing for that level 2. And we're going to hit level 2 at pretty much the same time, right? We're going to hit level 2 here, they're going to hit level 2 there, and we don't have that advantage over them, so I should be more reactive, right? I'm just horribly out of position here, and so I'm going for a Q. What should happen here is I just get hooked, and then I'm going to take a lot of damage, a huge amount of damage. Braum is not that tanky early on. Luckily, they don't quite realize that, and they're tunneling on the ADC, but we really need to make sure that we are reactive on these windows. Otherwise, We can make an argument, again, either way for the wave management. I think I'm a little bit more inclined to hold a freeze here because my jungle is pathing up the map. But the most important thing is how we are going to use our spells. So I'm not going to be pressuring from fog. I'm not going to be jumping forwards and forcing anything. I'm going to be more reactive. Speed this up a little bit. And so eventually Blitz finds a really good hook right after minion dies and hits our ADC. But these are the type of trades that Braum is going to excel in. I get to use my W defensively. Unfortunately, I don't have the Guardian, but I jump to my ADC, and then I get my passive and the Q onto the Blitz crank, get a huge amount of damage on exit. He almost dies. I find an auto attack onto the Kai'Sa, so that deters her from chasing forwards. And that's just kind of job done. We have successfully disengaged for our ADC. And then we can see Blitzcrank. He's really low. Of course, he's going to look for a base. And once he has based, I don't need to be reactive anymore. Right? I can start to look to fish for a W onto a minion, into a Q, onto the ADC. And if it lands, maybe we get a kill or at least a flash. So you can see that shift in body language. Unfortunately, I whiffed the Q. But it's the concept that matters. And then we're going to get that crash into base, so that my ADC can spend and heal up and have a good wave set that's pushing back into us. And then I'm just going to roam towards mid on this window. This isn't anything Braum specific, but of course you can roam and meet up with your jungler and, you know, have quite high impact in these types of skirmishes. Unfortunately, it just doesn't quite work out on this window, so that's fine. We are going to go home and then path out onto the map. Poke my head around mid. Again, there's no real pressure to go to bot right now and do anything in particular with the wave. I can pressure with my jungle. I can use my jungle here. And then maybe we can get a fight onto this melee Nautilus mid. And Braum plus Ivan is quite a scary combo, actually. Really strong extended fights. I try to flash to block his Q. And then eventually I'll move back down bot and be reactive with my spells once again. And just a couple more points for this game. So it is post 8 minutes. I'm going to look for an opportunity to shove mid and move up the map with my jungler when he is going to be active on top river. I know that he still has his top camps up. He's not showing me body language that suggests he wants to be active on top river right now. So I'm just going to be posturing around mid, and I'm going to be ready to shove mid and then meet him here, right? And so that's my body language here. You can see I'm pinging as well. I really want to shove this wave. I don't want to just hit Herald without forcing them to catch a wave under tower. And, you know, if we also shove their minion wave, they're not going to have vision so easily around mid with the minion wave. And so I'm pinging. And then eventually, maybe my presence here helps alleviate some pressure for, you know, my team to get the Herald here. So we do end up getting the Herald at least. It's just a little bit uncoordinated. And then there's going to be a bit of a skirmish. And since my champion is so good into this short range comp, I can be reactive in skirmishes as well. I can wait until they use their abilities forwards or they pick one of my teammates, and then I can use that as a, you know, an opening to start the fight. And so that's exactly what happens. Someone gets hooked, and then I just decide to pull the trigger and get the fight started and spread my passive. And so we can just have a look at that one more time. I'm not going to proactively use everything, but in this situation, it's a great time to pull that trigger because they've used their hook, and my champ is just really good against these short-range champions. I wanted to show one more example of a Braum lane into a ranged matchup, and this is going to be against Soraka, which is going to be a much trickier lane than the Janna one we saw earlier. And I'm going to look to be proactive with my Q usage. If nothing happens, it's just going to be a slow bleed out. And we are paired with the Ashe, so we do have quite a lot of threat. If my Q lands, then we both have that approach velocity, and we can just run them down and have a lot of threat level 1. And so I land the Q. I'm looking to force this level 1 fight because an extended all-in type of fight is going to be favorable. These ranged champions more so want the poke and the slow War of Attrition play. And so we get her summoners. That's great. I'm just going to look to stay healthy, hit level 2, pressure from fog as well, so that they don't see my Qs coming, and so that, once again, I can stay healthy. Find a Q onto the Kog'Maw, and now we burn his cleanse as well. Unfortunately, my Ashe gets really low, and we get early ganked. We're going to end up okay. But this is a pretty good situation in a way for us to be in, as long as we can find a window to crash and base. We have burned all 4 of their summoners, and so this squishy range lane is now a lot more susceptible to a potential all-in when we come back to lane, or to a gank when Kayn is around our lane as well. Unfortunately, the wave is stuck up here, and so we're going to try to hang around and crash the wave as well as we can, really emphasizing staying healthy and dodging those Soraka Qs. And eventually our jungler is going to meet up here, and so we might be able to take a 3v3, which is a fight that I would be a little bit more happy to play in. It's going to be a bit of a fight. My ADC gets one shot. I'm going to flash over the Soraka Q and then commit onto the Kha'Zix. So this isn't really too much, too important for the Braum early lane blueprint. I'm just going to speed past this a little bit. So after all is said and done, we traded 1 for 1. The wave is going to be collected by my ADC. They have no summoners, and so there's a big target on their back for the next little while. Let's get back into the lane. And so maybe if we get the wave to freeze on our side and I have Ignite, we might be able to have 2v2 threat. Otherwise, it's about being proactive with my spell usage and really fishing for those angles and staying healthy meanwhile. Playing in the bushes, dodging those skill shots. And there could be a potential angle for me to jump forwards and get a fight started, especially once they start to get a little bit too close to my melee minions. So this is something that you can keep an eye out for. Your minions up the front are going to give you that jump. I'm going to use my E to get a little bit of move speed and try to find a Q. Unfortunately, my ADC is just a little bit too far and got hit by a Soraka Q. You can see the intent though. And eventually this wave's going to crash. Okay. The problem is my ADC has just gotten poked out too much that I'm not really convinced that we have enough threat. The lower your ADC gets, the more pressure you are under to just shove instead of freeze, so that they can heal up and spend their gold. And it's these types of situations that are just going to happen as Braum versus some of these ranged matchups. You're going to lose 2v2, you're going to slowly bleed out, and you're just going to have to wait until your jungler is on your side of the map to get bailed out. Unfortunately, my ADC just keeps on taking every single skill shot from the enemy. And now we're in a really, really rough spot. And this is the situation you want to avoid, because once our jungler is on our side of the map now, we're not in a position to be able to use his gank to shove or to kill them. So if you're going to be blind picking Braum, this is the reality that you are aware of and that you're agreeing to. Sometimes you're just going to be trapped in a really hard 2v2 lane. And so I'm just going to jump a little bit forwards now. And what is going to happen is it's going to be the same song and dance. We're going to come back down. We're going to be getting poked out. My ADC is really struggling to stay healthy, eating a lot of skill shots. But eventually there will be an opening if we're creative for that opportunity and we're looking to be proactive. Eventually they're going to misstep a little bit. That's going to happen over here. Soraka's just a little bit out of position by herself. I jump forwards onto the minions, I land a Q, and then that's going to give us an angle to all in here. And you just have to be in a position and looking for these opportunities. Then you can get something done. So we force her flash, we force her ult, awesome. And then I'm looking to cut the play because we just don't have kill threat. We just can't 100-0 a champion like this. And so I'm backing off. Unfortunately, my ADC misreads the situation and then just ends up dying and I miss my Q. But this is how you are going to be able to relieve pressure when you're just slowly bleeding out. Pounce on an opportunity to W forwards, land a Q, and then you can force a really heavy trade, or you minimize, you stay healthy, you wait for your jungler to come and relieve pressure in your lane. So for this game, this is from the perspective of my gold student as the Braum here. And this is really going to highlight how we just don't really have enough threat to warrant a freeze in the 2v2 situation a lot of the time. And so we're going to come back to lane, and the wave is pushing into us, and this is a potential for a freeze. But if we don't have any threat to capitalize on that freeze, then it's not a freeze, we're just getting shoved in and bleeding out. And so what we should probably be looking for on this window is to just shove and overwhelm them with minions and try to give them less opportunity to siege, to poke, to pressure, given that our jungler is topside, right? You have to pay attention to your jungler on this champion. And so isolated 2v2, we're posturing as though we have any type of threat to punish this wave position, but we really don't. Even though Caitlyn just kind of face checks a bush for no reason. They have too much range. We don't have enough threat. And the opportunity is going to disappear for us to try to shove, to look for autos, to ping our ADC to shove. Giant wave is going to crash. And then we're just stuck under tower with very little to do. And we're going to be bleeding out. And this is going to make it harder for us to use our jungler when he eventually is going to be bot side, because your jungler is always going to be bot side at some stage. And the worst case scenario is you haven't been minimizing enough, and then your jungler is around, can't achieve anything, then he's going to go and leave your lane for a significant period of time again, then you're completely stranded, and you're going to lose really hard. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit. We got poked out, we didn't minimize appropriately. And like we said, of course, our jungler is going to eventually path down towards our side of the lane. We could have been a lot healthier. And this moment could be a lot cleaner if we have full health. So now it's a bit dicey. If we try to force, we could trade 1-for-1. We get quite lucky and we have to invest our flash to get out. But I'm sure you can see where I'm coming from here. Minimize, be in a position to use your jungler to relieve pressure around your lane if necessary. And be prepared to make the decision to just try and shove and not default to freezing the whole time, especially if your jungler's away, so that you can try and get some form of pressure and you can scale up without bleeding out too much. For this next VOD, I wanted to do something a little bit different and show my perspective as Nautilus versus Braum, which is a bad matchup for myself, just so that you can see how Braum can be punished. And so it's going to be a bit of a game of chicken. I can't really Q forwards too freely because he has his Guardian, his Bone Plating, and his Q, and he can't Q freely because that will give me an opening to two-step. And so it's just about who is more patient and who really understands the matchup better. You're going to see it. I'm just going to be posturing. I'm not going to be fishing for my Qs too much. But eventually I'm going to look for the two-step process. And for those of you that don't know what the two-step process is, this is a tool that I've designed to help you trade if you don't have kill threat. The first step of the two-step process is to engage, use all of your cooldowns, back off immediately. And what that will achieve is you'll chunk them out or you will force some crucial cooldowns. And then the next time that your engage is up, you commit more and then you're going to get a significant amount achieved, whether that's flashes or a kill or a big chunk or whatever. And so the idea is I want to force out his Guardian. I want to force out his E with one short, concise trade. And then the next time my Q is up, offensive spells are always going to have a shorter cooldown than defensive spells, right? 16-second E cooldown, Guardian, ridiculously long cooldown of 90 seconds. And so I'm going to have a period where I can actually make significant progress in the lane. Okay, posturing aggressively. Hitting level 2 first. We're going to decide to let this wave push back into us. And then I can find a short, concise trade. A two-step process. Eventually. Still posturing. And then Braum is going to try to walk up to get this cannon. He uses his Q. This gives me an opening. Now I'm ready to pounce on his wasted Q. And we force out his E. We force out his Guardian. And then the next time my Q is up, we can get some meaningful progress done. Now my jungler is pathing down. And so he is going to gank our lane. But even if our jungler wasn't pathing down to our lane, then we're going to have that window for me to really posture aggressively in the 2v2 and make some progress. And so like either way, in a 2v2 setting, it's really hard for either Braum or Nautilus to make like real progress, and that's why it's going to favor Braum in this matchup, because he's happier with that type of pace of game. But our jungler is here, and Braum doesn't have his Guardian. And so we're just going to catch him out here. But you can see that I'm not being overly aggressive. I'm not trying to overplay my hands. I kind of understand my limitations in this matchup, and I'm making quite deliberate and precise decisions. And the other thing is, while Braum is hard to make progress in his lane if you are an engager, what you can do is you can be a bit more mobile, right? Nautilus can be hooking around, or if you're playing a more mobile champion like Bard or Pyke, you can roam around, you can leave the lane easier, you can have more threat in skirmishes and in ganks, and you can use that as an opportunity to make inroads in this matchup as well, not just tunneling on bot lane. And just to prove that, what is going to happen on this window is we're going to shove a bot wave, I'm going to shift up, and then I'm going to posture around mid, and then eventually collapse on a skirmish around here while Braum was stuck dealing with a wave under his tower, and he's just a little bit slower. Because while Braum needs to be reactive and is happy with that type of lane, he also doesn't have enough threat to force us out of lane and to shove us under tower and to prevent me from having first move towards fights in the river or in mid lane. For this VOD, I want to show Bard into Braum, and this is just my ranged support counter pick of choice into Braum. Honestly, any ranged support that you pick is going to get a free lane into Braum, and you can do whatever you want, whether you want to dominate 2v2 or whether you want to roam around. I prefer the roaming around option, and having the freedom on a champion like Bard to just control bot wave, get prio, control bot river, move between mid and bot in fog, and the map is completely unlocked for you. It just feels really good. And so I'm just going to speed through this game quite a lot, but you can notice that I have a lot of freedom in roaming around. My ADC is never really under any type of threat. And I'm able to roam a lot easier than Braum because we have the shove, and I have a lot of mobility in my kit that he doesn't. And so I'm able to move towards mid, I'm able to link up with my jungle, and get involved in these fights that are just inevitable in solo queue. Hang around, get some more fights here. Meanwhile, my ADC is more than happy just minimizing bot by herself. Come back down. Get some prio. Poke them a little bit. And then it's going to be rinse repeat. They really can't do much. I have absolute freedom. And Braum is pretty much just stuck under tower hoping that I don't do anything and that I don't carry the game. If I was playing a Soraka or a Karma or a Nami or anything, then I would be a little bit more focused about poking and sustaining and generating a health lead bot. But this is just one option that we can go for. The last example versus Braum, we are the Rakan here. And the reason that Rakan is good into Braum is because Rakan can't get punished by jumping in like other engagers can, because he always has his E to leave. And so Braum's strength comes from being able to punish engagers by getting his passive and getting his Q onto them, so that when they try to leave, they're going to take a lot of exit damage. Not the case for Rakan. And Rakan also has a little bit of enchanter-like elements to his kit, right? He has his shields, but he also has his Q, which can be, you know, a ranged poke tool that Braum can't really deal with too well either. And so what we're going to see here is I just have a lot of freedom to be able to jump in and do whatever I want and then always jump out. So I notice Braum just a little bit out of position here. I jump on the ADC. Braum misplays this heavily. He should just press E and jump to his ADC. But even if he does that, then of course I can just get all of my damage out and I can jump straight back out and they're not going to be able to punish at all. And so then I'm winning lane, and Rakan being able to win lane scales exceptionally well as well. Very scary champion to have this freedom with. So we get that big chunk on the ADC. I just have so much freedom to be proactive, to run forwards, to fish for Qs with no care in the world. You can see I can just kind of sprint at them, use that range advantage there as well. And then come team fights, it's really hard to interrupt Rakan's ult. Just wanted to give a visual for this matchup as well. Moving on to the mid to late blueprint. So the first concept is mid first. You have probably heard me talk about this if you have watched any of my other videos and guides. Mid first means you understand that the middle of the map and mid lane is important. You want to shove mid, you want to get a mid ward in the lane as deep as possible. Because mid waves meet before side waves and it's in the middle of the map, so then you can shift to either side and control. And if you are able to consistently do mid first, then the game is almost going to win itself. You generate that window of pressure to control a part of the map, then you come back to mid, you do the same, you rinse, repeat. Next concept in the mid slate is going to be pressuring with your jungler. And pressure with jungle means that you understand that it is hard to achieve anything meaningful on the map if you are away from your jungler. If your jungler is farming camps and you're looking to do something, you might get caught out. If you're trying to do something top and your jungler is trying to do something bot, then someone is going to get caught out. So for the most part, reserve your windows of proactivity to be when you are with your jungler. Of course, we're not going to follow him around when he's doing his jungle, but when he's active on the map, you're active on the map with him. And then it's just going to be about how we are going to approach fights as Braum. So we want to have a plan for our E and potentially our R. However, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of champions in solo queue just don't have these meaningful projectiles. There's a lot of bruisers and assassins and short range champions. But it's still a question worth asking yourself if there is a meaningful projectile that you want to save your E for. Now, having an idea of when you want to press R, the most consistent R usage for Braum will be using it to disengage when the enemy team engages forwards, because then there's no way that they can escape your ult and it'll be really impactful. And especially around chokes where it's going to fill up the whole area. However, you can use it as an engage tool sometimes, especially if you use it right after that E mid W for the animation cancel for your ult. Using your ult proactively, it is going to be much harder to hit than reactively, so be prepared to throw your ult for a juke. Otherwise, general fight approaches for Braum, it's going to have a similar dichotomy to his laning phase decisions. If you picked Braum when you are countering the enemy comp, there are a lot of short-range melee champions, then you're comfortable with being reactive, with just playing front to back, counter-engaging, disengaging, spreading your passives. However, if you are versus a longer range, or a trickier, more mobile comp, where your E and your ult and your passive isn't as easy to use or as valuable, then we need to be more proactive. More pressure is going to be on ourselves to initiate those skirmishes, to collapse on sides, to jump forwards aggressively. This is just the nature of this champion who so clearly enjoys versing one style of play and struggles against another. Okay, moving on to mid to late game examples for Braum. And in this example, we're versus a very short range enemy comp. So it's just about having fundamentals. We're going to look to do mid first. We're going to look to be mainly reactive and just punish their engages. And so the Rel there, she jumped forward. She used her cooldowns. And so obviously I have a little bit more freedom to move forwards. I'm just posturing. I can fish for Qs, but my defensive tools I'm going to be a little bit more reactive for. And so what happens on the back end here, I know that Rel just used all of her cooldowns. She's not very scary. Rek'Sai used their knock-up. So we're just going to chase forwards here a bit. And they need to find a window to engage. And if they can't, then we're just going to win. And if they do, then I'm going to counter-engage like that. And so Akali lands her E on my ADC. I'm ready to peel her. This game, I decided to go 3Q into W max. As you can see, they are a very short-range comp, and so it's about keeping my Jinx alive mainly, and there are no meaningful projectiles to block with my E. And so once the Akali finds an E onto my Jinx, I have my Guardian, I have my Q, I don't even need to use my W, I have my Locket, and so there's no way they're getting through all of that, and then we can just fight and clean up on the back end. Okay, let's move forwards a little bit. Eventually going to go home, come back out onto the map. And then we're going to look to do mid first, and then move from mids towards our jungler if we can. You don't want to tunnel on doing mid first. If there is a fight breaking out, of course you'd rather move to the fight. But if there is nothing pressing happening anywhere else on the map, then you do want to emphasize mid first. And if your team doesn't listen to your mid first pings and body language, then that's fine. Just embrace reality and do whatever your team is doing. Very important that you understand what you can get done with mid first, though. So here we're going to shove mid. We have our mid ward already. Going to go fishing with a Q. Nothing too important there. And so then the enemy team collapses, and now it's just about playing out this fight. We're very close to our mid tower, so this fight isn't too scary. I'm not pressured to use my W, use my E, use my R immediately. I think they're just a little bit out of position, to be honest. And so what ends up happening is the Akali overextends and tries to kill our Jinx, and then the Rel has already used her W, and so I can just start to be a little bit more proactive now. They used their engage, they messed up. Samira jumps in, and then I'm going to use my ult reactively to her jumping in and ulting. We get a kill there, and now I'm confident to chase forwards, get my passive onto the Rek'Sai, trying to spread my passive around as much as possible as well to get as much CC and threat as we can, and then it's a pretty simple cleanup on the back end. Speed this forwards a little bit more. Unfortunately, my jungle dies. Come back out onto the map. And then my mid laner dies as well. It happens. What can you do about it? So now I'm going to look to contest around Baron, but I'm going to be reactive. I understand that my champion is really good against theirs, and I have an ADC that I really want to peel for, so I can fish for Qs, but I'm not going to hard commit with my Poppy over here. This is not how I want to play the fight. I'm going to be reactive. I'm going to play front to back. I'm going to try and peel my ADC. As you can see, use my Q defensively, my W defensively, my E defensively, my Guardian, and then we're slowly going to get to clean up on the back end. Unfortunately, I missed my Q. If I could be a little bit more patient, run further forwards and land that Q, we can really just clean up on the back end. And then I really try to find an ult as well, but she gets to dash away from that. It's a concept that is the most important here. Obviously, I miss executing. But you can kind of see the shift in body language, right? Initially, I'm being defensive. They're pressured to engage. Once they engage, we kite back, and then we can clean up. So in that last game, we were versus a short-range comp, and we had the mid-tower advantage, which made it easier for us to do mid first. And just to tick the boxes and win the game, this is going to be the other side of the coin. We're versus a much longer range, trickier comp to deal with, and they have the mid tower advantage. So they can get mid first. And so this is just going to be a really tough game to play out. We can do whatever we can. We can try and maximize our chances of winning. Maybe the enemy team throws and we want to be there. These games are just going to be largely out of your control. You just got to do your best, right? And so what I'm going to do on windows like this is there is the pressure for me to be proactive and creative, right? I really want to find some picks, inject some volatility, force a skirmish, and potentially concede mid, right? Because it's just going to be really hard for us to get mid since we're behind, since they have mid tower advantage. So I'm going to be creative. I'm going to try and stay in fog and try to collapse on the fight here. And we see Jace maybe just a little bit out of position. Maybe he hangs around, maybe he doesn't. But there's nothing for me to achieve mid. I would just be sitting mid and conceding, which is a lot worse than looking for something like this. And so eventually we find Malphite, we get a chunk, we force his ult, so that's something. Let's speed this up just a little bit. We get access to a mid wave there. I'm trying to get some wards around here, but it's going to be really hard to make much progress around mid. So eventually I'm going to once again look to be proactive and creative, move away from mid, try to inject some volatility. I should have been down here in this skirmish a lot faster. I should have moved away from mid and realized that this is my win condition faster. But you get the idea, this is the type of fight that you want. Skirmish and chaos and unpredictability. We can't rely on just shoving mid, and we can't rely on that neat and tidy, reactive, front-to-back type of fight win condition. Unfortunately, it just doesn't quite work out. But there are plenty of opportunities where the enemy team might throw, right? If they get a little bit lazy, if they get a little bit complacent, then we could clean up in these fights and find a comeback. And so what happens here? I'm really pouncing on any type of opportunity to fight, especially with a numbers advantage if I can find that. So I'm going to flash over the Jinx traps, I'm going to jump to my ADC and make sure that she dies. She just got one shot anyway, but that's something that I'm going to pounce on, not any type of ARAM around mid. There's going to be one more example in this game, so let's just jump forwards. And here I'm being proactive and creative again, right? There's no ticking the boxes as a win con. Maybe the Jace overstays around here and my team can take the portal and collapse on there. It turns out that he already backed off, but you get the idea. You're really limited by your champion's proactivity, and try not to get emotional, try to overforce too much. You can only do what you can do, and just accept that some games are just going to be really hard for your champion to play. This is going to be another example in the mid to late game of a really tough game. They have the Soraka and the Kog'Maw and the Swain, and they're all really good against my champion. And just trying to have a front-to-back, slow controlled fight is not going to work out, and we're going to get a very clear visual of that. Can't run through the Swain. Don't have enough threat. Soraka's going to be healing them up as well. We're just going to be slowly be getting poked on the fringes of the fight. Maokai tries to engage. Can't really follow up on that. Don't have enough threat. Slowly bleed. And so this is the type of fight that we should expect to have when we are versus these longer range, really tough ARAM comps to verse. Instead, we should be conceding this whole fight and trying to find some picks around the side lane. Maybe concede mid, maybe link up with my Kayn and really try to inject some volatility. The only thing is my Lux is really bad at side laning, and so it's going to be hard to play through her. And the Maokai in the side lane is going to be losing really hard to the Vayne, which is a bit slippery to catch as well. So a really tough game, and we're just going to want to give ourselves the best chance of catching a throw if the enemy does so, and a lot of times in solo queue they are going to do that. And so we were slowly bleeding out more and more. Skip forwards a little bit. Not overstepping. I kind of understand my limitations as a champion, not overforcing. Giving myself the best chance of winning, which is them throwing. No point in me just sprinting into them and dying or hard engaging like that. My teammate gets caught out once again. Can't fight through the Swain. Kiting back. Really, really tough game to play, especially from behind. Let's wait until I respawn. Back out onto the map. And maybe some volatility around the side lane. Could be something to play around. Doesn't work out. Still playing on my limits. Still ready to catch a throw if it happens. Potentially linking up with my jungler, but we are a little bit stuck on our side of the map. Being as patient as we can be, and then eventually I decide to collapse on the Vayne. Maybe we can catch her, maybe she's a little bit out of position. Turns out that we just can't really get on top of her too easily. But we are going to try. Doesn't quite work out. But then, we see their jungler is mid, we see their mid laner is top, we see they were committing a little bit far forwards here, and then here is the throw that we are ready to catch. They just extend it a little bit too far, we get the kill there. And then the Cogmore extends a little bit too far, and then we're hanging around, we get a Q off onto him as well. This is our best chance of coming back into the game. And that's just the reality, and that's why this champion is really, really hard to blind pick. Some games can feel really out of your control and you're just hoping for a miracle, or at least a big throw from the enemy team. For this game, we are versus a shorter range comp, and we have mid-tower advantage, so we can have that tick the boxes win con. I just wanted to give another visual of getting mid first and then pressuring with jungle and then unlocking fights for your team. Just coming out of base here, I wanted to show that you want to use your E to get a little bit of move speed when it's active, and then you can W2 the waves coming out of your base. May as well get out onto the map as fast as possible. We get mid wave there, and then I'm going to move towards my jungle here, get some vision control, and then I can go right back to shoving another mid wave and then moving again. But we think that someone is around here, and then we can collapse on that. And so that's exactly what happens. We notice the enemy jungle. We're with our jungle, and we just get to start a fight. And this is just exactly the type of fight that we want, right? Because they're just slow to move. We were here first. Just the last point I wanted to mention for this fight is that I want to be able to engage on this person. My engage isn't the strongest, so I'm going to lead with Q. If the Q lands, that gives me a lot of confidence to run forwards and then look for an ult. I'm not going to lead with ult because that's very dodgeable. Okay, so for this game, we are versus another really low range comp, but this time we don't have the mid-tower advantage. And so I still want to show how hard it is for your champion to be mis-executed versus these short range champions. Going to link up with my jungler. Pretty much going to run around and look to proc my passive if I can. And it's very hard for them to do much about it. Israel jumps forward. I know that Katarina's probably going to look to try to one-shot, so I place up my E, I put my locket down as well as a reaction. And then we are going to break mid-tower, and so now the game is really easy to play. Now we do have that really straightforward tick the boxes win con, get mid first, and then shift around the map, taking whatever we want. Just going to speed this section up a little bit. Base, come back out onto the map. Get mid first, and then eventually when my jungler is actively pressuring the map, I'm going to look to link up with him. Okay, moving towards my jungler. And then posturing back around towards mid until I notice someone is potentially out of position. Remember, you're not tunneling on mid first. You are ready to collapse onto fights if necessary. Back towards mid first. Allow my team to get mid wave shoved, get that mid ward. Move towards my jungler. Rinse, repeat. And eventually they can't just concede everything, right? They can't concede all their towers, all neutrals. They're going to try to fight. And then it's just a really straightforward, reactive front-to-back win con in these fights. Especially if they have to face check into our vision. For this game, I wanted to show an example where we can actually engage, and of course, it's not like you can never engage on this champion. If someone is horribly out of position, of course, you can get the fight started. It doesn't have to be fully committal either. So let's just see what I mean here. I lead with my Q, and then once my Q lands, that gives me some, confidence to land my ult afterwards, and then really get the fight started, especially for my Yi. So really try to lead with your Q. And then I'm just going to be trying to spread my passive as much as possible. And so the initial idea behind this was, I think Kai'Sa's a bit out of position. She got hit by my Q, and so now I'm going to trade my ult for her flash. She has her sums, I'm just going to force her flash out. But if she just decides to get hit by my ult, she's going to flash and die, or she's just going to die. And it just puts them in a really tricky position, right? When their ADC is just immediately dead in a fight, of course. Lastly, I wanted to give a visual on what a precise fight on Braum can look like. Because so far I've mentioned it's really easy to play versus short range. It's really tough to play versus long range. But if it's a bit of both, and you want to get the most value out of your cooldowns, then this is what it can look like. Okay, so I'm going to fish for a Q. This Kai'Sa is once again out of position. Land the Q. Start to posture forwards. W onto my mobile ally once they have jumped forwards, so I can, get as much mobility out of it as possible. I see Wukong jump forwards, and so I'm going to reactively ult, and so now the Wukong is in a horrible position, right? It's not like I technically cancelled his ult, I'm just disrupting it and making it really hard for him to do anything, because he just jumped forwards. I'm not going to fish for my ult initially, because then he could potentially jump away. And then this is a game where my E can actually do something. I'm going to be saving my E for Syndra's ult. And so I notice that Syndra walks forwards and look to press her ult, and so I'm going to put up my shield there, block all of her ult damage. And then on the back end, I'm going to Q flash, because I know that my Yi is running forwards. And then I get a tag onto her, and then we just get a clean kill there. And then on the back end, I'm going to be spacing Jax's counter-strike, and then I'm going to land my Q, I'm going to jump to my ally and protect him. And so this fight might not have looked like much, but we can just get one more visual of this without the pausing in the commentary. And we can just pay attention to my spell usage and my positioning. Spreading that passive. Okay, good stuff. I want to wrap this guide up by talking about the Braum champion contract. And what a champion contract is are certain points that you agree to that you are going to stick to if you decide to play this champion. If you sign off on these points, then you are going to have the best time with Braum. The first point, I agree it is going to suck versus long range, versus mobility, and I am prepared to be proactive and creative in those situations. That's just the reality of this champion. If you can come to terms with that and not be too frustrated and not try to overcompensate too much, then you're going to keep your mental, perform as well as you can, and give yourself the highest chance of victory. I understand my champion will thrive as a counter pick for short range and engage, and I can be more reactive in these games. Likewise, you are going to be really strong against your champion thrives at disengaging and counter-engaging versus these short-range comps, and you can afford to be a little bit more reactive. You can always have that peace of mind that you just do really well against the enemy comp and you don't have to overextend or force engages or anything like that versus the right comps. I understand that my champion lacks threat compared to other melees. This is going to make setting up plays yourself a little bit harder. This is going to make wave management a bit more nuanced, and again, just embracing your champion's identity, his strengths, his limitations is going to go a long way. I will pay extra attention to my jungler in the laning phase. We're going to need our jungler in a lot of cases, on paper at least, to fix waves or to have realistic kill threat in our lane. And last but not least, I will have fun. Braum has an awesome champion design, a very cohesive identity, and that's the whole point of playing this game anyway, is to have fun. If you do have fun, it's going to help you to stay motivated and reach the highest level on this champion and find the best results. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed. Big thank you to all of my patrons over here. I really couldn't do this without you. The links for coaching, for Patreon, for my School of Support Discord server, for socials, they're all going to be linked in the description below. Any and all support is greatly appreciated.